So welcome, Nick. Nick Cotter is with us from Ireland, and he's nicely agreed to actually help all our budding entrepreneurs who are studying right now and give some inspiration and his lessons and his stories on how he is where he is today with his brother and how they have created various enterprises. And also, if I remember correctly, and you can correct me, done a lot of these competitions and a lot of pitches. So Nick, lovely to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you, Benva. It's an absolute pleasure to be here as someone who's come through the whole GSEA program. I had the great privilege of judging it this past year for Started Up Season 2. So it was a lot nicer to be on the judges' side of the equation rather than on the pitching side. So I obviously had a lot of empathy for the guys who both won and the guys who didn't win. But look, it was a lovely experience, and it's great to be here today to share some of the learnings on the journey. And yeah, have a bit of experience with various pitching competitions. They're a great source for us to be able to make new contacts, to network, and to test case the business, which I think will be one of the first lessons really that I could ever share, which is sharing your idea with people as soon as possible to try to get that test case to see is it sticking and where the faults are in it as quickly as possible to find that right idea.
Amazing. I like that. And I heard you say this earlier also, that look at this as an idea sharing. Look at a competition or a pitch as an idea sharing to know whether this is going to go somewhere or not. And better to have that feedback at that stage of where you're starting your entrepreneurial journey rather than understand that you've created possibly a bigger issue to crawl out of. I think that's something which stuck out on what you were saying earlier too.
Yeah, I think so. Something I see often, and we sometimes do it, is putting the cart before the horse. You need to get things in the right order, and before you ever spend thousands and loads of time trying to develop an idea, you really want to know that it's the right idea. And I think it's the number one failing I do see in startups. Like, we go to an innovation tent every single year in the agricultural space here in Ireland, and without, like, you're looking at about 95% failure rate in the first 12 months. And the biggest reason I see why is because they develop a product in a silo. They don't actually go and talk to customers and don't engage enough with stakeholders to identify if it's the right idea. So I think pitching competitions like GSEA, beyond the prize money, beyond the networking and the exposure it will gain you for yourself, it really is that validation to kind of A/B test. Are you working on the right idea in the first place? And if you're not, use the judge's feedback to find the right idea and just keep going, because you will get there if you persist.
Fantastic. So your message to the students would be that persistence and go with the idea. Whatever idea you have, try it, right? So I hear a lot of students saying, oh, I am only selling, a product from buying from one and selling to the other. Is it really a great idea? Should I even try? What would be your answer to that? As in, they're starting their journey there and really having these questions that, is this pitch for them, or is it too small an idea?
Ambition is important, but I think everyone has to start their entrepreneurial journey somewhere, and it will be different for everyone. For me, myself, I just worked at what was in front of me. Our first business was selling firewood, knocking door to door on houses around Abbeyfield in estates, trying to sell this. It wasn't a game-changing idea. It's not the first thing in the world that was ever done, but it's what was in front of me and taught me a lot of the skills I have today in terms of communication, in terms of being able to take no as an answer and not get too down on myself, because there was many times we'd knock on the door and someone would just close it in your face or tell you to using words to go away. And that's just something, it builds your confidence. So there's a lot to be said for just going and doing it. And if, buying and selling goods at the moment, not necessarily working in a very innovative space, is where you're at the minute, that's a great place to be. At least you're actively attaining and practicing the skills of entrepreneurship, and that can set a great foundation to be able to go on to more ambitious entrepreneurial ideas. And that's certainly what happened in my case, where we started with a very traditional business providing just a home heating product to now solving problems around changing the way farmers medicate their animals to be more sustainable and to have the use of medication globally in livestock. So it takes steps to get there and work at whatever.
Yeah, an amazing journey, right? From selling firewood to now having a couple of businesses which you are running and running them successfully and improving them year on year. But it did start, I think it's good to know that it started back there, right? Knocking on the door and saying, buy some firewoods. And that's what would be the message to a lot of them. Do what you're doing, make the mistakes, learn the skills which you have. Nothing goes against you, right? It's always a learning.
Yeah, and I think there's a great saying that I like to follow, which is that even every plan that ever made contact with the battlefield never lasted. So what I mean by that is there's only so much you can find out through theory, and a lot of it has to be found out through practice. And I know it's cliche, but failing and making mistakes is where the learning is made. And I've seen that throughout all of my years in terms of being involved in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But those initial things as well, the basic skills, doing things you don't like, that money is not made easily and that it really does take effort, and doing it even when you don't want to. Those three basic skills are going to be found no matter what type of a business you're using it. And you will need those three skills no matter how ambitious or how basic the business is. They're just fundamentals when it comes to running any kind of a business on your own.
Amazing. You said something about, in the beginning that there's a lot of empathy when you were on the other side to the people who were winning and the people who didn't make through. What would be, we talk a lot about people who win and what should it be and how should you go for winning. Tell me, what is it that you would want to tell children who didn't qualify, who didn't go to that next step, or they went through till the competition and didn't win? There was somebody else who won, or they didn't even make it. What's your message to them?
Comparison is very dangerous, and that's what we need to understand. And I've been on the losing side of the equation many times as well. There's a particular guy in Ireland, Mark O'Sullivan, who owns a company called Neurobell, and the two of us were on the same entrepreneurial path in terms of relative time frame, such that we were entering almost every single pitching competition side by side. Now we do stuff in animal health, he does stuff in human health. And human health is always going to trump animal health because of the value it contributes to society. And I tell you what, if I was on a judging panel, I'd pick the human health equation as well, because it is more important. So we were constantly getting second and third places. We could never win when that was the competition. But then we have to come away from that and say, okay, like that doesn't demerit or take away anything from our idea. It's just a simple case that on the criteria that were presented in front of the judges, this other idea won. But we have to be careful of comparison. Who we need to compare is I am and who the business was yesterday, not to who someone else's business is today. So it's to stay on track with our own idea. And yeah, it's hard, and the empathy comes from the fact that these students who choose to go for these pitching competitions, they are choosing to be brave and to go for it. And that's important. But I would always encourage, don't get discouraged, because there will be a day when you will end up on top, but you have to keep going in order to do that, and you have to always be moving the ball down the field if you want to get there. So that whole element of getting used to hearing no, because there will be a lot more no's than yeses, and you will find that across the board when we engage with customers today, prospects. We're not going to hit 100% of them. We mightn't even hit a majority of them. It will be a small minority, but that minority is what is creating a business for us. So it's the practice, and it takes patience, and it's hard, but understand that it's part of the process, I guess, is what I'm trying to get across.
Absolutely. I think very, very wise words. Absolutely. I think what you have learned in many of these years of entrepreneurship, while your role of 23, I think 10 years or 11 years of entrepreneurship, you have learned all those lessons by having the door being closed on you, having not won, maybe come that first position. So these are valuable lessons. And I think a lot of students who are listening and have possibly been feeling discouraged should feel they can see the sunlight right at the horizon and say, okay, I have to keep trying and I have to keep getting better. So, and now tell me, there are students now, we've qualified, there are students who are going to be making their final pitches and they're figuring out what to do, what to present. Sometimes you see that they have a fantastic idea, right? The business may be great, but they're not able to present that to anybody else because they've got all of 10 minutes to tell their whole story. So what would you say? Now you've been on this side, you've been on the other side, you've also seen the second season. What would you tell them that what is it that they should be bringing about in those 10 minutes and make that mark and let the world see who they are?
Yeah, I suppose I would say about communicating the idea, it's confidence. And confidence is hard to come across because often you're talking about the future with these business pitches. And I especially am very uncomfortable with projecting into the future because you're setting future promises. And if you don't deliver on them, people will come back to you and ask later on what happened. But there always will be an explanation. But just it is to understand that that is part of the process and you need to present yourself as confident as possible. But there's no reason not to back yourself, because if you have been working on this idea and if you're spending all day and night thinking about it, there's absolutely no reason why you aren't the best person to present it. It's just refining that communication process, and all that is practice. Nothing more complicated than that. I suppose in terms of the things I looked for when I was judging GSEA last year, the number one thing I look for is someone who I think is going to stay in entrepreneurship beyond this initial idea phase. And that is trying to basically see, and that's why GSEA is about values rather than being about necessarily the idea, because what we want to find is not necessarily someone who has the best idea who wins. It's actually someone who has the most promise of going on to continue to be an entrepreneur, and in particular quite a successful entrepreneur. So it's vision and it's values. It's, can they see where they want to go, and do they have the values to do it? Do they accept that no is going to be said a lot of times? Do they have the work ethic required? Are they actively trying to surround themselves with the people so that when they're in the room, they're not the smartest person? Because I tell you, if you're the smartest person in the room, you are in the wrong room. So you need to surround yourself with those mentors. And Alexander the Great even had a mentor, and that will always carry you through. And then I suppose I'd look for someone who's getting the hit off of entrepreneurship. I always say that that is this is a hard career, and sometimes people tend to sugarcoat it and say it's amazing, you get to work for yourself and financial freedom and all these other cliches and promises of how amazing it is. Yes, there are the good parts, but that is not the day-to-day reality. The day-to-day reality is getting out of bed off your own back. No one is going to tell you need to do these things. You need to do this stuff yourself, and it is at times a difficult job. It can become lonely, it can become isolating. So, and it's going to have a hard wearing effect on the people closest to you. Your significant other is going to see you less. You're going to be less mentally engaged in everything that's outside of your business, because this is all you're going to think about, certainly in the early stages. And your family as well. You're going to need to lean on them for support in every fashion. So you need to get just such an incredible buzz off every single time a customer rings and their success, or you end up getting that fundraising round. And if it's not hitting like that, I highly advise maybe considering not doing it. And what we see in the pitching competitions is we see that come through in the pitches. That passion is going to come across in how they speak and how they articulate themselves.
Let me also ask you, Nick, while you say that, remember that most of these are students, right? So they are not just, they're also juggling their studies. They have exams, they have their submissions, and they have this. Like, we had a student making a pitch standing outside of a class, right, in one small remote area. Now, network is an issue. There are other things which they're dealing with, but there's that passion of just standing there and making that thing. But it's not easy. It's not easy. There is to be able to get everything and all your balls in line, right? So what's your suggestion to them? How do they manage the time?
It will always be a juggling exercise. And what you find is that college is actually, in some ways, the easy part, because when life comes into play and there's children and there's family, there's dinners, and there's a house to be run, the time gets even squeezed even more significantly. So like, juggling is just a natural part of life and something you do need to get to grips with. And what I would suggest is to have a framework, have a plan, because fail to plan to fail. But what I've done throughout my life is just a very simple, urgent, important matrix that everything gets evaluated on those two criteria, both, because something can be important, but it may not necessarily be urgent. Equally, something can be urgent, but not necessarily important, where all you're doing is just firefighting, answering phone calls as they're coming in. That just might not necessarily be the next best thing to do to get you to the next step. So again, when we're looking at trying to evaluate students, we want to look at people who are adopting that kind of mindset of always working on the most obvious next step that's going to get them to the next place, and trying to squeeze in every hour they can of efficiency, so that time is not being wasted. Because as a startup, and even pre-startup, when you're just working with an idea, like, you're defined by the fact that you're restricted in terms of two resources. You have a finite amount of time and you have a finite amount of money. But to be honest, it's your time that's actually more important, and a lack of focus will kill you. So what we need to see is people who are not putting the cart before the horse. They're very focused on trying to just get to the next milestone, and they're using their time efficiently to get to that.
Amazing. Such useful tips, I think, from starting in terms of recognizing the failures and their importance, to perseverance, to time management, to the Stephen Covey's urgency and importance. I think you've lots of valuable lessons you've given to our listeners, and we thank you for that, Nick, and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Pleasure.